And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. And if you are new here, please hit the like, share, and subscribe button if you will. Today, I wanted to talk about Ndrangheta and the biggest Mafia trial that we have ever seen in history. Other than the Maxi trial, of course, it's been over with for a few weeks, and over 337 defendants, 207 of those were found guilty. And the sentences totaled over 2,200 years in prison. It took 3 female judges over 2.5 hours to read out the verdicts and sentences against the worldwide leader in organized crime that we know being Ndrangheta. And it's one of the biggest mob trials in history of the world. Over 2,500 police officers were involved in the case. Over 25,000 wiretaps were used. 600 lawyers and 900 witnesses would be corralled into a specialty-built warehouse to have this trial. At the center of the case were 5 murders, one particular case involving the torture and revenge killing of 2 mobsters in the summer of 1996, another murder of a gay gangster in 2002, and another double homicide in 2002 as well. 3 of the 5 bodies were never found. Ndrangheta has become the biggest group, organized crime-wise, surpassing many cartels and the Mafia itself. While Ndrangheta is every bit as Mafia as it gets, they have a stricter moral code, if you want to call it that. And they have single-handedly taken over crime for the most part when we discuss organized crime in the world. And one of the bigger schemes that Ndrangheta has goes back to the old land baron days of feudal land ownership and how hired men hired small private armies called the Mafia to control their lands. Ndrangheta is no different. And anybody who refused to sell their land to Ndrangheta paid a huge price. Anybody who refused was killed. Maria Chindamo, 42. She had refused to sell her property after her husband died. And Ndrangheta basically killed her, fed her body to pigs, and any bones that remained were grinded up by a tractor. Another victim was strung up in a tree for 3 days and tortured around the clock with cattle hoof clippers. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen those, but forget about it. That's not how I would want to go. Another victim was tied down in a cornfield and run over with a tractor tiller while he was still alive. Matteo Vinci, who refused to hand over his land, was a victim of a car explosion. And what makes that murder particularly gruesome is the fact that the explosion didn't kill him. It actually broke his legs and he was unable to get out of the car and he burned alive. Another victim of an extortion plot was told to pay $2,000 a month protection money. And when he didn't, a dolphin was found outside of his business as a message. Another victim with the same circumstances went to work one day to find a puppy hanging by his throat above his door in his shop, and the puppy's legs had been broken. Other would experience the same visuals like cat heads, goat heads, and cattle heads, and more. Ndrangheta has cornered the market on everything. Especially within this case, Ndrangheta controlled mortuaries, gravestones, coffins. They controlled everything, and so that when families wanted to bury their dead, they were forced to pay insane prices for your funerals, and Ndrangheta would work together to force turf territory over funeral homes. So in other words, any funeral home that was located in this area belonged to this crime family. Any funeral home in this area belonged to another family. And they cut up turf rackets according to that. I don't think we've ever seen the American Mafia ever do that. The cemeteries, which Ndrangheta would control, also used those grounds to hide automatic weapons in vaults of the deceased, according to reports. A janitor working at a cemetery in Vito Valencia, which is utterly controlled by Ndrangheta, found a Glock stashed in a vault and he stole it. When Ndrangheta found out, they had his legs broken because Ndrangheta has a vow and a code that they live by that they cannot steal, which, and anybody who does is going to suffer the ramifications and the wrath of Ndrangheta. Ndrangheta absorbed EMS services, forcing EMS to transport wanted members by ambulance all over the country. As well as moving suspects or wanted persons, they used ambulances to transport narcotics. They completely absorbed construction, washing their narcotics cash flow through sub-companies. And Ndrangheta was so sophisticated, they built underground tunnels for miles in Calabria. Perhaps what is more shocking than the brutality and the sheer amount of is really the sheer amount of political control that Ndrangheta wields. In this case alone, Giancarlo Patelli was sentenced to 11 years in prison, and he was a former senator of the Italian parliament. And he would swap sides between Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia and the current Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia. As Luigi Mancuso's lawyer, he was convicted of mafia-type conspiracy for repeatedly tipping off mafia clans about impending investigations. One of Patelli's informants was Giorgio Naselli, who was a lieutenant colonel in the Carabinieri. He was sentenced to 2.5 years for repeatedly slipping investigative secrets to the politician. So they control politics. Through politics, they control the cops. Among others sentenced that the last 2 weeks was a member of the Italian Secret Service, who had once been a member of the Anti-Mafia Investigative Unit, also known as the DIA. It emerged that a deviant Masonic lodge acted as the zip connecting the political and criminal worlds together. The mafia would use its manpower to elect certain politicians, and those elected officials would then award Ndrangheta-run businesses and arrange a public contracts and would turn a blind eye to their scams. They have taken control of everything. And just to give you the sort of viewpoint as to why it doesn't matter what the authorities do, the numbers are simply staggering. There are 150 known clans of Ndrangheta, each clan allegedly with 300 to 400 members. I'll read that again. There are 150 known clans of Ndrangheta, with each clan with 300 to 400 members. And that number is simply staggering. There are in dozens of countries, not just Italy. The fact that they control politics, narcotics, fruit, stores, even pharmacies, everything that they are doing makes them unstoppable. They control areas in Italy that traditionally the mafia controlled. Rome is now controlled by Ndrangheta, which used to be a stronghold of Camorra for decades. The mere fact that in Milan, as we talked about and reported on probably 3 weeks ago, Cosa Nostra, Camorra, and Ndrangheta have merged together as one to control Milan completely and those surrounding areas. And it's forbidding at best. The best alternative is mayhem. And what I mean by that is if these groups don't come together, it's going to be murder, chaos, and mayhem, the likes of which we've never seen before. And probably historically, the powerhouse in Italy would have been Toto Riina or Bernardo Provenzano. These were men who controlled with an iron fist. The Corleonesi and Ndrangheta is 10 times more powerful than Riina or Provenzano could have ever been. That's what makes it scary from a certain level. This is an entirely different scale. And the one thing that I think we can take from this trial is even with 207 people getting convicted, with only 3 of those 207 getting 30 years in prison, Ndrangheta is a sliding scale of sorts. And what I mean by that is where 207 off the streets in New York would fully decimate a family, because even in the heyday, they have 250 to 300 members here in New York City per crime family. If you took 200 of them off the street, that family is done. The family is done. But you take 207 off the streets in Calabria, it doesn't matter. It doesn't dent them. New York would never be able to replace those guys. But in Calabria, 207 go away and 300 more step in. So I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about Ndrangheta just because this was a huge trial. It was a huge trial. And I don't think we've ever seen anything like this before. This is bigger than Cosa Nostra bigger than the Mafia. And the differences, just so for those of you that may not understand the difference, Cosa Nostra is Sicilian by origin, okay? And more or less, the reality of that is, depending on the way the rules change or whatever the case may be, is usually your father. First, it was your parents you had to be 100%. Then it was your father had to be at least, Italian for you to join membership. And anything and everything in Cosa Nostra it's not, in the old days, it was Sicilian. You had to be Sicilian, and Sicilians didn't trust northern Italians. And obviously you go back historically, you look at Frank Costello, and certain men didn't want Costello around because he was not Sicilian. That was Genovese's big gripe with him. He's fucking from Naples. We're not even going to deal with this prick. They wanted nothing but Sicilian gangsters. So there was a lot of that sort of heritage fighting that went on amongst the groups. But what makes Ndrangheta different is they're all related by blood. We're not talking by marriage. We're talking by blood. By blood. And in contrast, we sort of look at the way that American Cosa Nostra has sort of evolved, if you want to call it that, over the years. And there's been something like, and this number may not be totally accurate, but it's the last thing I saw, that in the history of organized crime in America, there have been over 8,000 informants. And the history of Ndrangheta, 81. That's fucking insane. That's insane. Now, this particular case, just because I know somebody is going to ask, how many informants? There were a bunch in this one. I think there was like 26. But 26 informants when you have 377 defendants is not big. It's not big. And the thing is, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because, like I said earlier, the point I want to hit home with all of you is, out of all of this, you throw 207 in jail. There's 150 clans with 300 to 400 members per clan. That shows you how big they've become. And we'll see what happens. But I don't think this is going to stop anytime soon. And the only thing that we may see, and this is kind of what I'm waiting for, is not everybody can play in the same sandbox. You understand what I mean? Not everybody can get along. And the minute that this shit begins, where somebody doesn't want to sit back anymore, that's when it's going to become a problem. That's what we're seeing in Canada, believe it or not, because Ndrangheta has absorbed pretty much everything there. And that's the infighting we're seeing is between the Hells Angels, other criminal groups, Cosa Nostra, and Ndrangheta. So, a lot of people don't think that Ndrangheta is as big as they are, but they're dangerous too. That's a difference. That is the difference. Because they have no compunction about murder whatsoever to prove a point, which makes them dangerous. And that's sort of kind of it. I just wanted to come on and talk for a couple of minutes. If you guys can do us a favor, go over to Facebook, type in Mob Talk Radio Show, give us a follow, give us a like, subscribe to the page. This is where we drop a lot of information and other things like that. And if you have a moment, please head over to YouTube, which you're watching this on, obviously. Just give us a subscribe, give a share, give a like. That's all we ever ask for. We do lives on Sundays typically, but we're doing them on Wednesday nights. The history of organized crime. Nobody does it better. And in closing, per the usual, like and subscribe.